Well, welcome everyone back again. I know it's been a while since I've been on. I'm back in my studio here in California. I had a memorable trip a couple weeks ago, actually almost 2 weeks now, that I went back to Philadelphia, to the New York area. But I was very blessed to be able to uh, interview the Hall of Fame boxing promoter, Russell Peltz, in his offices in Philadelphia. We're able to do a podcast from there from my iPad, and we're going to be showing this now. And I do have to say that, yeah, a little technical. Maybe the voice is a little bit maybe tinny, but I think we get a good idea, Russell. And I hopefully this is going to be the first of many. And I just hope you enjoy it. And here we go. My interview with Russell Peltz in his Philadelphia office is about a week ago. And this is going to be the first of many for his uh, YouTube page, the official Russell Peltz for everything boxing. So welcome to Russell Peltz and his first podcast with me. Well, welcome again to the latest edition of Carl's Corner. I know it's been a little while since the last time I've done one, but I've now taken it on the road. I'm back east in Philadelphia. I was in North Jersey the last couple of days with another person, but now I'm here in Philadelphia in the actual office of Russell Peltz. Russell, I want to thank you so much for allowing me to first come in here. And with my vision of actually having an actually dedicated YouTube page for all your videos, all your information on YouTube. And I know we were supposed to do a podcast about a month and a half ago. But before I was actually doing everything, I realized that a 3-minute podcast would not serve me well. And I came up with the thought of having something condensed into one that's official for you, that's all your product, all your previous videos and anything, and then you'll have your own voice. Because I remember, because we're going to be promoting this book, $30 and a cut eye. That's a phenomenal read. And actually, that you actually had a radio show here in the Philadelphia market a few years ago that you had talking about boxing. So, thank you again.
We're going to have fun. I'm looking forward to this.
I love this, and my friend Darryl behind the controls, my cousin Vince, with my video. So I'd like to begin at the beginning. But I know there's a video online that Ray Didinger, who's actually a prominent Hall of Fame writer for the Inquirer. You went to college with him, correct?
Absolutely, Temple.
Temple.
We met at the Temple News as freshmen.
Yeah, don't worry about mails coming in. We're live, no problem.
Maybe some checks.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, Russell was just out in Arizona, right, at a match, and a fight that I actually watched a little bit on ESPN for you, but and I'm graciously that we were able to schedule this today. So go ahead.
Ray came into the office one day in his ROTC uniform. First time I met him, and I looked at one of the other guys in the office and said, "We got to get this guy out of that uniform." But I was lucky. You go from high school. I decided beside boxing, I was a college basketball fanatic in high school, and I went to the Palestra for the first time in 1961 to watch a college basketball doubleheader. And those of us who went to the Palestra in those days, it was like going to college basketball heaven. Every game was sold out. 9,269 people. Every game came down to the final second, and the school spirit was South, Temple, Villanova, Penn, St. Joe's. And you'd walk out of the Palestra on such a high, you couldn't wait to tell somebody what you'd just seen. And what better way to tell them, I thought, was than to write about it. So I decided in ninth grade I was going to be a sports writer, study journalism in college, and work for a big city newspaper. So when I got to Lower Merion High School, and by the way, I tell people, Kobe Bryant went to my high school.
Yes.
I didn't go to his.
Yes.
So, the school paper comes out 6 times a year. I was the sports editor of the paper and the yearbook. But when I got to Temple, the first day, and I said, "Where's the school paper?" They pointed me to this old building, and I walked up the creaky steps, and I heard the chatter of the old Royal manual typewriter. And I said to someone, "How often does the newspaper come out?" And they said 4 times a week. I thought I died and going to heaven.
Yeah.
I said, "I've made it." And I became sports editor as a sophomore. And Ray was on my staff. He's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Dick Weiss, who's the top college basketball writer for the last 20 years. We worked together. Frankly, I got there before Dick did, or I'd never gotten it. I traveled with Temple's basketball team for 3 years, and went away games. And at the end of, but I loved boxing. I'd always loved boxing since I was 12 and had seen my first fight on TV. Anyway, I got a job working the midnight shift at the Evening Bulletin during the summer between my junior and senior year. I'd work midnight to 8, editing copy, headlines, rewrites, and I'd made it. This is what I was going to do, and I get emotional when I tell this story.
This is why.
At the end of August, Jackie Wilson, listen, the Bulletin was the oldest continuous afternoon newspaper in the country. Jackie Wilson came in one day. I was getting ready to leave. It was around 8 or 9 in the morning. He said, "Russell."
Well, who was Jackie Wilson?
He was the sports editor.
Gotcha.
He said, "You're going back to school for your senior year. We'll keep you on Saturday nights. And when you graduate in June, we'll bring you back full time." I thought I was going to cry. And he saw the tears welling up in my eyes.
What you're doing right now.
I believe this story. And I said to him, I said, "Mr. Wilson, and I mean this as much today as I meant it then, I'll work for nothing."
Wow.
And I would have worked for nothing, because this is my goal in life. And he looked at me and he said, "Forget it. We'll keep you on and we'll pay you." So I worked midnight to 8 during my senior year. I went to school from 9 to 1. I went home and went to sleep. And then I came back at night. And I think, listen, Ray Dinger, Dick Weiss, Ron Pollock, whose dad, Harvey Pollock, was the stat guy. This was my I was awarded the Outstanding Male Journalism Graduate at Temple in 1968. And I think it was because I had that full-time job. But, and I stayed at the, I went away to Fort Bragg, North Carolina for basic training in September of '68.
The Army?
Yeah. I was a cook. Thank God nobody died. I used to put the cold cereal out on the line. Anyway, when I came back in February, Jack Freed was the boxing writer, and he'd been there since 1927. This is 1969, and they knew I wanted to be the boxing writer. And they kept, Bulletin mandatory retirement was 65, but they kept giving him extensions on his retirement. And as glamorous as the sports writing business is, I found myself watching the clock. And I said, I'm not going to watch the clock for the rest of my life. So the Bulletin Morgue is the name for the library, where they had every story that was ever printed in the history of the Bulletin, every photograph, a giant room full of file cabinets.
The microfiche?
No, not then.
Really? I was doing
No.
microfiche.
So I'd go in there because there was a lot of downtime when you're working midnight to 8. Deadline was 6 for all the copy to be in. And I'd start pulling out files from the Blue Horizon because I figured that was the only place I could afford to promote. And I started writing down what night of the week.
So you already knew that you wouldn't promote fights?
Well, if I couldn't become the boxing writer, yeah. So I saw what night of the week, how many people paid, how much money was netted. And I made these long lists and I studied them. And I went to Jackie Wilson in September of '69, August. I said, I'm leaving, I'm going to be a boxing promoter. And he didn't laugh, but he smiled. He said, I'll tell you what, we'll keep you on one night a week as backup in case you don't make it. And, wish you the best of luck. And I worked for George Casita, who was a wonderful writer. He was the 76ers writer. He said, what makes you think, and I got married in August of '69, and my first wife, he said, why would you get married and become a boxing writer, boxing promoter at the same time? I said, George, I like fights. So, but there was an office memo. There was a lot of skepticism.
Of course.
And I intercepted an office memo one night, and I forget the body of the memo, but it was signed Russell B. Back. Russell be back. Meaning I wouldn't make it, and I'd be back at the bowling. And when I saw that, I was determined to sell every single ticket to my first fight, which I did September 30th, 1969. It's still the largest crowd in the history of the Blue Horizons, the largest official crowd, 1606, because it only holds 1,346 people.
Now, did you have boxers in mind? Did you have enough money to be able to afford the boxers, or just to get the venue started?
Well, going to Temple, I lived at home.
Okay.
You got paid to be an editor at the Temple News.
Gotcha. And
I was working a year and a half at the Bulletin, so I'd saved, I had about $5,000 in the bank. And I'd written a couple stories, one about an amateur kid named Bobby Baloo Watts, and I'd met some people covering some amateur boxing shows. Pat Duffy, who was Mr. Amateur Boxing at the time, but had a pipeline with the pros. He was involved in a minority way with Leotis Martin, the heavyweight, and Benny Briscoe, the middleweight. So, yeah, I knew some people, and boxing was dead in Philly in '69. It was a post-Olympic year, so there were a lot of young kids, but there'd only been, this was September of '69, there'd only been like 5 shows the whole year, and nothing since May. And I missed, in 1966 or '67, I went to Oklahoma City to cover Temple's basketball team for the school paper and for the Bulletin as a stringer, and I met Tom Cushman there. He had just come east from Denver to cover boxing for the Daily News, the Philadelphia Daily News, but he was out there covering Temple, and we got very friendly. And when he heard, I'd sit next to him at courtside, when he heard I was going to be a boxing promoter, he thought it was really cool that a 22-year-old college grad was going into boxing, because Jack Freed and the guy at the Inquirer, Gene Courtney, these were old, hardened boxing writers, and not to defame them, but boxing writers over the course of history were not the most upstanding people. They took money or gifts from promoters. Some of the greatest, like Damon Runyon, was on the take to get publicity, and the Daily News, where Cushman worked, they were straight. Stan Hockman and Cushman told me from the get-go that if he ever found out that I was taking care of the other guys in town, that would be the end of our relationship. So I said, Tom, I'm a journalism major. I would never even think of doing that. Because if you read the stories when I first started, the difference between the write-ups in the Daily News and the write-ups in the Inquirer and Bulletin were like night and day. The day of my first show, Courtney's story in the Inquirer was, is Peltz ready to get skinned? But if it hadn't been for Cushman, I don't know if I could have made it. But it was the story. It was as much about me as it was about the fighters in the early days.
And there was one mention that you had when you were still at the Bulletin, that the writer that was there before, he was still old school. But then, Muhammad Ali was very, very prominent, but he would still call him Cassius Clay. And didn't you go by the type and change the name before?
No, what happened?
The edition was
in 1969, he's still calling Muhammad Ali Cassius Clay. So I'm on the desk, and he hands in a story, And I changed them all in his story to Muhammad Ali. So, the Bulletin would print 6 editions a day. Like, you could go to a newsstand on a Friday night and you'd say, Phillies lead Milwaukee 5-3 after 6 innings. That's how we got our news. Anyway.
People are watching this, with this technology we have, that's the way you used to get your scores before radio was big and TV was big. And look how we are now, so yeah, continue.
So Jack Fried comes in early and he picks up the first edition of the paper and he sees it's all been changed to Muhammad Ali. Well, he went ballistic. He didn't legally change his name. This isn't right. He was screaming at me. He ran downstairs to the composing room where the linotype machines were, and he had them pull the lead lines out of the linotype machine and change it back to Cassius Clay. I should have gone to the sports editor, Jackie Wilson, and said, hey, Jack, Mr. Wilson, this isn't right. But I got feedback years later as I wrote the book.
Yeah.
He would never give me credit. He would never come to my press conferences. He didn't want to think that he should, I don't know, give credence to a young kid. So I found out that he would call the boxing commission to find out what fights I was going to announce if I had a big fight coming up. And I caught on to this. So I called the boxing commission. This was in 1971. I had a big fight at the arena at 46th and Market. I said, Benny Bristow's going to fight Curtis Cokes, the ex-champ, and Cyclone Hart's going to fight Louis Rodriguez, the ex-champ. So Fried puts in the paper the day of the press conference that that's what's happening. And the press conference was to announce Cyclone Hart against Kitten Hayward. Okay? So the other 2 papers said, if I'd been more mature, I would have gone to Jackie Wilson and said, come on, Jack, you got to Fried. And I would have sat down with Fried. When I was a 22, 23-year-old, 24-year-old kid, I was so happy at my revenge that I wasn't mature enough to try and mend fences with him.
It was a fascinating part of the book, though. But, so that parlay that you were able to say, I'm out of the Bulletin, promoting first. So what was the mechanics of saying, okay, what's the first thing you had to do? Second thing, you had to get the fighters, you had to get the venue. So,
well, there had been a guy who had promoted at the Blue Horizon from 61 to 64 named Marty Kramer. And there had been no fights at the Blue Horizon from 64 to 69 except for one. So my dad and I took Marty Kramer out to dinner 2 or 3 times and picked his brain. And then I called Pat Duffy, who I'd met through the amateurs, and he got me Benny Briscoe for $1,000 against the percentage of the gate. And he suggested that if he fight Tito Marshall in a rematch, he'd beaten Benny a few years earlier. And I told you, I started going to the gyms every night. I went to the gyms every night. And I just lived at the gyms, and I met all the trainers, and they'd read about me in the paper that, from Cushman, and listen, it was a different world back then. Guys were training and they were starving. They just wanted to fight. They didn't care who they fought. They just wanted to fight. So Duffy said, I got another kid, Clarence Finney. You can put him in a 4-rounder. And Jerry Judge at heavyweight from Kensington. And I would go to those days, Philly guys fought each other. Mm-hmm. And I'll fight him. The Patio gym where Pop Bates was, where he threw me out one day when I was still a sports writer. And I put the show together. And
did you know the venue owner to get them to say,
okay, Jimmy Toppy. I went to visit Jimmy Toppy, whose dad had been a promoter in the 40s and 50s at the Met on Broad Street, and who owned the arena. And we sat there and talked, and he later thought that was a joke. He said, listen, he told people later that he never thought it would happen. But originally, Harold Johnson was going to be my first main event because he was my boyhood idol. But we were like $500 apart on the money. And then when Duffy said you could use Benny Briscoe, Toppy said, night and day. It's going to be night and day. You're going to sell out. And we charged $5 and $3. $5 for ringside, which were reserved then, and $3 for the balcony, which was general admission. And I just got, there's no social media.
No.
And some of the fighters took tickets, but it wasn't required. And Toppy would close this is how I was, how sick I was. Toppy would close his office at 2 o'clock, and his was the main box office at the Blue Horizon. So I would drive to the Blue Horizon, I would park my car right there in front of his, in the entrance, and when I would see people walking up the steps to knock on the door to come in and buy tickets, I would go, yo! So I would open the trunk of my car, and I would sell the tickets out of the trunk of my car. And my dad took 90 tickets, which was one ringside section, $5 a ticket, and he gave them out to, he was in the plumbing, heating, and air conditioning business, and he sent tickets with write-ups of me to all his friends. So, but other than that, that was 90 tickets out of 1,606. It was just crazy. It was, and my wife hung out good luck banners the night before in our apartment, and she later told Sandy Grady, who was a wonderful sports writer, she said, I thought we should celebrate while we could still afford. She was a reporter at the Inquirer.
Okay.
So she had a full-time job. And, we made close to $1,500 that night.
In 1969.
Yeah. And I
That's
was,
after all expenses.
yeah, including my phone bill. Yes, after all expenses. In fact, I made my wife give me $5 for her ticket.
Ah.
Just so I could say that every ticket was sold. And
that's really before national television. There was no television. Now, obviously, there's no radio. Obviously, there was no ESPN. There was no cable networks or anything. So
it was all newspapers.
All newspaper. And weekends would have rivalry sports, maybe a fight every once in a while. But that was it for boxing in the late 60s and early 70s. So that must have obviously got you to the general adrenaline rush, knowing that, hey, this is what I want to do, and you went from there.
Well, I promoted 15 shows in 7.5 months.
Wow.
I don't know how. And what did I have? What did I say? 80 fights, 54 knockouts, 26 in the first round. Because I was still learning, but in addition to that, we had some good prospects. Cyclone Bart could knock your head off. Willie Warren Monroe, Bobby Baloo Watts, 3 terrific middleweights. Sammy Dawson, Olympic kid, the featherweight. We had good fighters. They could fight. But yeah, I was learning how to make matches. But the fans loved it. I mean, George Benton had his last 2 fights in Philly for me, the Philly legend. And, we made money on just about, I don't know, maybe at the end of the season I'd made about $5,000. If a show made $133, it was still a profit. And I was working one night at the Bulletin, and during Christmas and Easter, they let me work during the week. So my wife was working, and we got by. It was, you didn't promote in the summer in those days unless you could afford an air-conditioned building,
Right.
like the Spectrum, and my fighters, I wasn't ready for that yet.
Right. So that's amazing how that grew from there. So obviously you're getting your name locally, but also nationally, correct?
Yeah, well, when I was at the Bulletin, I would go to the Bulletin was right across the street from the 30th Street station. So I would take the train on Friday nights to the fights at what was then known as the Peltz Forum, which was the small arena inside Madison Square Garden.
Yes.
And I met a kid his name was Malcolm Flash Gordon, who sold programs, underground programs outside the garden. And he was like a muckraker. He wrote about all the bullshit that went on in boxing, all the bad matches. And I met him, and it was the most popular boxing publication. It was as big as Ring magazine, believe it or not. And he would mimeograph it on a mimeograph machine he bought with his bar mitzvah money. And he had about 4 guys working for him. Red Fox, who would film fights, Johnny Boss, who became an international booking agent, Don Majeski, who became an international booking agent, and Bruce Trampler, a matchmaker, and they would hustle the programs outside the Garden, make enough money so they could go in and buy a ticket. And when I started promoting, he hung out at the gyms in New York. He said, "Can I sell programs at your fights?" So my programs were going around the country for people who subscribed to his. So that way I got a lot of publicity.
So it's interesting that when we first came here, we took a tour of this amazing location, seeing all these posters and everything around us. We were upstairs. We pulled out a couple of these programs that were amazing, and it's just like it's artwork in itself. And reading the book, which I will show the book again, it could be available, online. We'll talk about that towards the end. But my recollection of boxing in Philadelphia, and my cousin was with me, I have to say, I was at every facility in Philadelphia or any sporting event except the Blue Horizon.
Shame on you.
So I know, shame on me, but thank you for my cousin Vince was there a few times, and I never experienced that. But reading the book, and I realized, I really thought you were the only guy in town. But I read the book, there was so much competition that came in that was, trying for the boxing, part. So it's, I didn't realize that with them coming in.
Well,
Competition.
Lou Casey was the busiest promoter in Philly in the 60s. Herman Taylor, the dean, who I consider to be the greatest promoter ever lived, who promoted Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano, Joey Jurgo, everybody. He would still he would cherry pick. He was in his 80s. I had actually gone to see Herman Taylor before my first show. It's almost like you want to marry the daughter so you get permission from the father.
Right.
And I went to see him in his office. As much as I love him and respect him, he was an old curmudgeon. You'll never make it. I said, Herman, you did $4,910 with Hal Johnson and Emily. No, we didn't. Emily, bring in the paper. So his secretary, Chris, $4,910. But he thought I was coming to do a story on him because I said I'm Russell Peltz in the home. When I finally told him I wanted to promote fights at the Blue Horizon, his whole demeanor changed. But he was still around, Herman Taylor, and he grabbed Cyclone Heart from me. And I realized that one day I would be in that position as the dean, because Cyclone Heart had knocked out Kid Hayward at the arena at 46 in Market, and we sold out. And I didn't care that I overpaid, because I just wanted to make the fight.
Right.
And after that, Herman Taylor said, hey, to Sam Solomon, his manager, Sam had played in the Negro Leagues. He said, I can do this and that. And after that, I had to negotiate for Cyclone Heart fights after that. But things worked out well because at the end of my first season, which was the summer of '70, Herman Taylor was promoting a fight at the Spectrum with George Foreman against Roger Russell. And I happened to be downtown in July of '70. And I was standing outside Sherry's ticket office, which was at 15th and Walnut. And out of Sherry's ticket office comes Jack Puggy, who had been a manager in the 20s and 30s and was Herman Taylor's matchmaker. And he's there checking on ticket sales. So we're standing on the corner. I'll never forget it. He's got his jacket draped over his arm. He's smoking a cigar and spitting it out on the sidewalk. And he says, I've been offered Benny Briscoe's contract, but at my age, what do I need another fighter for? So my head started spinning. I didn't say anything. I said, how much do they want, Jack? $2,500. All right. So I didn't say anything. We talked for a while. I got in my car and drove to my apartment in Germantown on Wissahickon Drive. And I called my brother-in-law, who was an accountant. I said, Arnold, Benny Briscoe's contract, he would do the payouts at all my fights, Arnold, pay the fighters. I said, Benny Briscoe's contract's for sale. You manage him, I'll promote him. And all these young middleweights, Hart, Watson, Monroe, one day are going to have to fight Briscoe to see who's the best in the city. And if we control Briscoe, we'll control all the big fights in the city. So he said, "Can I make my money back?" I said, "Yeah, you'll make your money. Don't worry about it." So Briscoe was managed by Jimmy Iselin, whose dad was a part owner of the New York Jets, Phil Iselin. So I called him on the phone. I said, "Is the contract really for sale?" He said, I said, $2,500. He said, "Well, he owes us $800. I said, $3,300. He said, "Yeah." I mean, fighters weren't making a lot of money in those days. $2,500 was a good payday for a main event. So I got on the train, and I went to New York, and I met him at the Palm. I've never been at a Palm restaurant in my life. I was a kid. I was 20, what's this, 1970, so I was, what, 21, 23, whatever, 23. He ordered a string bean and onion salad. I'll never forget it. It sounded so repulsive to me, but I didn't know what to order. So I ordered the same thing. It was actually pretty good. I handed him the check. He handed me the release. He runs into the kitchen, because there were no cell phones. He goes into the kitchen to call Joe Fariello, Briscoe's trainer. And they were so happy. And they didn't know how happy I was.
Yeah.
And we took Briscoe and Quinn Zolmakol, his trainer, his new trainer, who would become his trainer, out to lunch. Because there had been friction in the camp, in Briscoe's camp before that. And it's Linton's on Broad Street.
Wow. Yeah. Quantumats, right?
No, but this was...
Oh, that's like, yeah, that was like a diner.
Yeah. And we made the deal, and it was a game changer, because not only did I didn't know that Benny Briscoe himself would turn into the attraction he became, because he'd always been in the shadow of Kitten Hayward, Gypsy Joe Harris, Joe Frazier, the others were. I didn't realize it. And he scored like 11 knockouts in a row. He got me from the Blue Horizon to the arena, and from the arena to the Spectrum. And if I'm not standing outside Cherry's ticket office that day, who knows who would have wound up with Benny Briscoe's contract? Like I wrote in the book, if that hadn't happened, the title, it wouldn't have been 50 years in boxing, it would have been 50 weeks in boxing. I believe that to this day. I've never been there, because the Blue Horizon was never as good in the early days as it was that first year. It took years for the Blue Horizon to really make it. And I got lucky. It's just luck.
Yeah. Well, this is absolutely incredible. That this is really the first of many podcasts with this wonderful man here, Russel Peltz, about his amazing career in boxing. And obviously, I've taken travel from my home base down in California to come here to Philadelphia to actually meet him in person and do this. We're also here for his official YouTube page that we're going to be actually dedicated in another week or two for everything from Russell's experience as he's talking right now, things about the book, promoting the book. And I know you mentioned you had a radio show on WIP years ago, but only 1 hour on a Wednesday night for a couple of years. But here's going to be your outlet, so I think people who might still be around in that days, you can be able to invite them into. And it's really going to be a nice way, and really remotely, when I'm in California, I'll still be able to do it remotely with this fantastic new medium. But continue, just one other aspect that I remember when I read the book. People may have thought for other competition that, hey, you just go in here and you run a place, get some fighters in there and you make money. It doesn't happen. And in a lot of that competition, once they saw a few losses, they got out of it. Am I right?
Right. It's when Marty Kramer, as I told you earlier, the guy who had promoted Blue Horizon from 61 to 64, he had a saying. The saying was, all I wish on my worst enemy is it becomes a small club boxing promoter. Because it's you have to suffer the losses. First of all, you have to make good fights.
Right.
You don't make, if you're going to go out, if you're going to go out of business, you don't want people saying he made lousy fights. That's why they go out of business. You have to promote. People say, oh, Russell, he promoted for the fans, not for the fighters. I said, to me, that's a badge of honor. You can't, listen, in those days, people were bitching about paying $5 or $6 to go to the movies. You know, you're paying today $20, $30, $100 to go to the fights. You don't want to see a bunch of one-round knockouts. No. You have to have competitive fights. And in those days, it wasn't about building guys up. Only the strong survived. fighters made themselves. The promoters didn't make, now and then, but not post-sale like it is today. And when you love something, I fell in love with boxing. Well, I saw my first fight at 12 and on TV, and when I went in person the week of my 14th birthday, and I knew, just looking at the ring, that this was going to be my life. I knew it. When you love something, it overcomes the fact that maybe you're not the best businessman, because it's always in your head. Who can Hart fight next? Who can Monroe fight next? Is this the right fight? You're always thinking about it.
Well, you were always too, moves ahead.
Well, you have to be. You just got to. I wasn't going back to the newspaper business. I knew I could, but people say, "Oh, boxing's a dying business." Meanwhile, the Bulletin went out of business in 1982.
Right.
So newspapers died long before boxing. So you just have to hang in there. But Jimmy Riccio went out of business. Lou Lucchese went out of business. Herman Taylor passed on, but he was in his 90s by that time. Guys came and went. One guy said, "There's a new sheriff in town." See, what happened was, guys would get into business, would promote fights in Philly in order to put me out of business rather than concentrate on themselves. So Jimmy Toppy told me years ago, the owner of the Blue Horizon, he said, don't ever worry about the competition. You spend too much time worried about the competition, you won't pay enough attention to your own business. He said, concentrate on your own business and you'll be fine. And, I met a lot of really wonderful people. Gil Clancy, Jesus, first out of town manager to give respect to a 22 or 23-year-old kid. Angelo Dundee. These guys, they helped you. Do we have time for me to keep talking?
Yeah, we
don't have it all.
36.
Another 20. Give me a 10-minute. Yeah, another 20 minutes. What I want to say is that obviously in this podcast we can't condense everything into one, but I'm going to just say one thing that my dad always said. The harder you work, the luckier you get. So you never went back. So you mentioned when the Blue Horizon was kind of like fading a little bit. Where did you get a call from?
Well, no. When the Blue Horizon was fading, I went to the arena.
Right.
I went to the arena because Briscoe was big, and I could go to the arena with Briscoe. And in 1972, well, what happened was, in the fall of 71, Toppy saw that I was starting to promote in different venues. So he rented, up till then I'd been exclusive at the Blue Horizon. So Bob Montgomery, the ex-fighter, the lightweight champ from the 40s, they used his name and some guys put up money. I said, Jimmy, 2 promoters can't work at the Blue Horizon. It's tough enough for one. He said, no, I'm sorry. So in 72, I left the Blue Horizon and went to the 7,000-seat arena. And, Briscoe was getting up there. He eventually fought for the world title. We were drawing big crowds. But in the fall of 72, it was, slowing down a little bit. And in December of 72, I promoted a fight with Willie the Low Monroe and Indian George Davis and lost about $3 or $4 grand, which had wiped out everything I had made in the previous maybe 6 months, except for the fact that Briscoe fought for the world title. So I got a call in my office. I was 2 blocks from here. My father gave me space in his plumbing concern. I got a call from Steve Greenberg, who was the director of promotions at the Spectrum, and the Spectrum was dark on Monday nights. And they had to pay taxes and everything else, even when they're dark, so they wanted to start a bi-monthly, is that what it is, 2 fights a month?
Yes.
Monday night fights at the Spectrum, so I went down there and I met with Lou Scheinfeld, the president, and we agreed for a salary of $15,000 for the year, plus 10% of the profits. I would be named director of boxing at the Spectrum. And thank God,
But look at, you had a name already, so they knew that, hey, here's a man that would be able to book our arena. So the hearts, rather than be, something that maybe did not work there for a while, but they knew you were there, you were prominent, and then after the spectrum, after so many years, was fading a bit, and then lo and behold, in the late 70s, Atlantic City became prominent, and what cable network came on board? ESPN. So I'm just trying to consolidate a little bit to time over here, but show how you went progressive with the media that happened at the time with you. And I also have to mention, you said the Blue Horizon, for people who are not Philadelphia people, might be outside nationally. It's, remember the address?
1314 North
Broad, about a mile or two from that, where we're at right now.
Yeah, it's about a block or two south of Temple University.
So right now, we're only about 4 or 5 blocks from the famous Philadelphia Art Museum, the Rocky Steps, and the Rocky Statue. It's ironic that we're that close. And the arena, the Philadelphia arena, was on 36th and Market in West Philadelphia. I remember it as a hockey arena before the Flyers came here with the Ramblers and other events, but obviously boxing was there and you were promoting there.
It was next door to Bandstand.
The Channel 6 studios where the famous Bandstand was at that point, which is a whole nother podcast and thing on its own. But then the Spectrum was built in '67. Myself and my cousin had Flyer season tickets. But when you did the Monday nights, didn't think that, well, we're right there. 1970 started Monday Night Football, when you were competing with Monday Night Football and Monday Night Fights.
I told them that.
Didn't
I told them that. Because at the end of August, we were only about 6,000 or 7,000 in the hole, which is pretty good. And then September, October, November, we got killed. We wound up losing 50,000, which in 1973, it's in the book somewhere, I don't know what it's worth today. And Alan Flexer, who was the controller vice president, took me to lunch one day, which was at that time called the Blue Line.
Right.
Later became Ovations.
Yeah,
I knew what he was doing.
The restaurant at the Spectrum.
I knew what he was doing. He was taking me to lunch to let me go. And I said, Alan, if I can get the Philly fighters to fight each other, I can turn this around. And I wasn't sure. In fact, when I interviewed Alan for the book in Ventnor a few summers ago, he said he didn't think I could do it. But that's what happened, and he turned the program around.
But they said yes, they gave you that another shot.
Yes.
Look what happened from that.
We could talk about that meeting.
Another time, yes.
Meeting, yeah.
And I think it, there was in some Spectrum in the whole Atlantic City that lasted for 10.
Well, Atlantic City, listen, the 1980s was a license to print money in Atlantic City. The casinos, 849 shows in Atlantic City. Forget Newark, all the other. 849 shows in 10 years. Think about that. 85 fights a year in one city. Philly had less than 150 in the same decade.
Right.
So, but in the middle of '86, I get the call from Dan Duga to take a USA Network show off his hands for the Blue Horizon. And he doesn't make that phone call, I don't know.
But that was the harder you work, the luckier you get, correct? So out of that 880, how many were your fights?
Oh boy. 10 years. I don't know. Maybe 150, I don't know. 150 would be 15 shows a year. Maybe between 100 and 100. I mean, everybody from all over the country. The Tropicana had a fight every Tuesday night.
Right.
That's 52 fights a year right there on television.
Right.
So
When I moved down here in 96, 97, there was a woman that was doing women's boxing at the Tropicana.
yeah, Diane Fisher.
Diane Fisher. I know she was a hairdresser.
Right.
Got my hair when I was down there. Yeah, it's a small world, but it's fascinating the way it evolved. Excuse me, through television, through media, and the different venues. What was the biggest fight down in Atlantic City that you did?
What I did, Listen, I had two fighters that were hot as fire. Jeff Chandler, the Hall of Fame bantamweight champ,
Right.
defended his title down there. He had 9 or 10 title defenses, 2 in Tokyo. He must have won about 6 title defenses. And I had the hottest TV fighter for a couple of years, Frank the Animal Fletcher.
Yeah.
It was always on NBC. So popular. It was making more money than world champions fighting at the Sands. So my biggest years were at the Sands. We were doing business. They made a deal with Sylvester Stallone, Tiger Eye Boxing. He'd come and make appearances. We did an Aaron Pryor title fight against my guy, Gary Hinton. And ABC, NBC, CBS, everybody was in. That's why we bought a house in Denver.
Nice.
Because we were down there all the time.
Right.
So it was wonderful.
But one other aspect in the book that I find fascinating too, and we're just talking about Philadelphia, Atlantic City, but then internationally, you started not be part of international fights, and there's one part in there that you did how many fights in Paris?
Well, no, I didn't promote the fights,
Right.
but I had fighters fighters that I was associated with, like Benny Briscoe fought overseas. Jeff Chandler defended twice in Tokyo. Even like 7 years ago, Jason Sosa won a title in Beijing. But Paris and Philadelphia were the middleweight capitals of the world in the 1970s.
I didn't know that about
Yeah.
Paris.
Yeah, big time. Palais de Sport held 4,500. My favorite night in boxing, February 25th, 1974. Benny Briscoe goes to Paris and knocks out Tony Mundine in the 5th round.
Yeah, it's up there.
I have not only do I have the 5 or 6 different versions of the fight, I have the dressing room scene afterward,
Oh.
in which I look like Gene Shalit
Yeah.
with a 3-piece polyester plaid suit and the kind of bow tie a clown would wear that you'd squirt water out of.
Yeah.
And I've got a shit-eating grin on my face that I'm over there and I'm kissing Benny on his head and it was like the greatest night ever. And it wasn't even a world title fight, but it was such a big fight. AP, UPI, Reuters, every European newspaper was there. It was televised throughout Europe. It was like winning the world title, but we get offers to go back to Paris, Nice. I called Arnold up one day. I said, "Do we have to go back to Paris?"
That was funny.
Today I did my eye teeth to go back to Paris and have someone else pick up all the expenses.
Yeah, I think, that and, after the time, but after the 80s and the 90s, and it was kind of winding down, obviously this other media in UFC, all that was coming in. I know, the boxing purists didn't like that coming into the marketplace, but now it's basically almost took over. I know you have your opinions about where we're at today.
Well, the 90s were still wonderful at the Blue Horizon because we were selling out every show.
Right.
And it didn't matter who fought because it was the place to be. The first nail in boxing's coffin, in my opinion, came when USA Network discontinued their boxing series because it gave a chance for independent promoters to showcase their fighters without having to give up half of them to a major promoter who controlled the network, like Top Rank controls ESPN today, and Hearn controls the Zone. But when we got it, and I became the director of boxing at ESPN in 1998, so I could still do shows at the Blue Horizon, but there was a palace coup after like 6 months, and I was delegated to just being an errand boy, but I stayed in there and sucked it up for a few years, but it became the old boys club, and boxing just changed. It became, television, instead of paying what a fighter was worth. I mean, I did shows with Don Charget on Telefutura and Univision, the Spanish-speaking networks, but the Blue Horizon was gone. I had to get out of there because I didn't get along with the landlords. And we tried different things, and I came up, I still was involved with Arturo Gatti, and I developed Casino, who became a world champion at junior middleweight. But it was a struggle. It was a struggle. And now and then you'd make a killing on some, not a killing, but well, I'm sure stuff we can talk about later, but today boxing is not the sport I fell in love with. It's never going to be again. And the fact that we have to depend on Saudi Arabia
Wow.
to finance our business is,
You see what they're doing in golf now.
yeah,
It's amazing. So,
it's sad.
yeah. So presently, what are you doing besides?
I'm a consultant, I manage some guys, but I don't want to manage any Olympic kid. I don't want that kind of pressure. I don't, because how good is he? He's 20-0. How do you know? I could have beaten the 20 guys. I don't want to find out in the 21st fight that the guy can't fight and I've invested all that time. I want to know at the beginning whether he can fight. But boxing isn't like that. We used just to make fights. Now every fight, if you look, 9 times out of 10, either the red corner or the blue corner wins every fight on the card. We used to bet corners as kids.
Right?
It's all, even when you look on Box Rec, and you see everybody on the left-hand side is 10-0, 12-0, and everybody on the right-hand side is 5-18, 4-11, 3-12. I mean, that's not me. I'm not doing that.
Well, hopefully people who are watching this is going to enjoy this, because this is really the first of many podcasts, shooting video for maybe a documentary down the road. And we're going to end up having this Russell's YouTube page that maybe we could go live eventually one day, and people around the country, around the world could actually put their comments in, talk to Russell, have tribute about the book and other things. And hopefully everybody will really enjoy this podcast. I'm going to go on social media and try to prep a little bit. We're now Monday the 23rd. I think once I go back to California and look at this and maybe publish it next weekend, maybe we'll be here another day or two to get some other footage. But Russell, I can't thank you enough.
My
First of
pleasure.
all, allowing us to come here in this wonderful place. We only scratched the surface. I tried to go through as much as I could in this short period of time. And remember, his book, go get it. You have to on Amazon.
Amazon, or for me directly, either way.
Gotcha. Russell, thank you so
My
much.
pleasure. Thank you, Carl.
This is only the first of many. We'll be back. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.